how would the author of text 2 most likely characterize the underlined claim in text 1? So text 1, like the work of Ralph Ellison before her, Toni Morrison's novels feature scenes in which characters deliver sermons of such length and verbal dexterity, like smooth talking or skillful talking, that for a time the text exchanges the formal parameters of fiction for those of oral literature. Okay, parameters are like settings. You can think of like knobs, bass, treble, or brightness, contrast, something like that. The formal parameters of fiction for those of oral literature. Oral literature could be something like, sermons, speeches. So given the many other echoes of Ellison in Morrison's novels, both in structure and prose style, these scenes suggest Ellison's direct influence on Morrison. So that's a short enough thing that we don't really need to write it down, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Ellison directly influenced Morrison. So a little abbreviation there. What would the second passage say about that? In their destabilizing effect on literary form, so they sort of challenged the norms of literary form, the sermons in Morrison's work recall those in Ellison's. Yet, so there seems like agreement to begin with, but we have the contrast word yet. So yet, literature by Black Americans abounds in. It's full of moments where interpolated speech, we'll come right back to that, erodes the division between oral and written forms that literature in English has traditionally observed. So consulting the dictionary here to get a clearer definition of interpolate, I think we're looking at something like 1b, to insert words into a text or into a conversation, or to insert something new. So I think it would be like spoken type language inserted into literature, or like a novel or short story. So Morrison's use of the sermon is attributable not only to the influence of Ellison, but also to a community-wide strategy of resistance to externally imposed literary conventions. Okay, so they're saying, okay, Ellison may have influenced Morrison, but there is some common influence. In other words, something that is influencing both of them. So it's not just that he influenced her, both of them were influenced by this other thing. And what is that other thing? The community-wide strategy of resistance to externally imposed literary conventions. The thing is, we don't need to break that down and analyze that down to its core to get it, to get the correct answer here. But, strategy of resistance, you're standing up to, you're resisting something. Externally imposed literary conventions, that would be, conventions, ways of doing things, standard ways of doing things that are imposed from the outside. Okay. Outside of their community. Okay. So based on the text again, how would the author of text 2 most likely characterize it? Well, it's a little bit narrow because it overlooks this other influence. So it fails to consider their uses of the sermon within the wider cultural context in which they wrote. So normally I would say equivalent would be the kind of extreme word that would make me a little bit wary. But, the sermons that recall the sermons in Ellison's, I think I think that connects. Their uses of the sermon, the community-wide strategy of resistance would be the wider cultural context in which they wrote. So I think that is the correct answer, but let's look at the others just to be sure. So B, as being indebted to the tradition of resisting literary conventions. Okay, so B is tempting, but we have to keep in mind the question stem. The question is asking how the author of text 2 would characterize the underlying claim in text 1. B would be a more accurate characterization of the writers themselves or their uses of the sermon. I think B is taking a lot of words or phrases, resistance, resisting, literary conventions, and plopping them down here in the answer choice. And so this is the kind of thing that I definitely would say, will catch a lot of people, because it does have some distinctive words from the passages. Probably more than just those. But we have to keep in mind that our correct answer is often going to paraphrase, as we see with A, and incorrect answers will often do something like this, where they'll take a distinctive word or phrase, plop it in the answer choice, but upon closer inspection, you see that, that's not really what's being said in the passages. And so that's what I'm going to say about B. C, as disregarding points of structural and stylistic divergence, neither one of them talk about that. It's all about the influence, the similarity. And then D, as misunderstanding the function of sermons in novels by Black American writers other than Ellison and Morrison. So I can think of one question where that other than wording is part of a correct answer, but so often that's what they do. It's one way they'll come up with incorrect answers. They'll say, works other than, or writers other than Ellison and Morrison. That's changing the topic. We're talking about Ellison and Morrison and their place within a broader community. We're not talking about other specific writers. And so that's just changing the topic. And so our correct answer here will be A.